I recently moved into a new home with my partner. In all honesty, it's the house of our dreams and the ideal match for us. When we first moved in, everything felt ideal since we rescued a kitten named Bella together. At first, the house on our right was the sole drawback. The owner had begun renovations but never completed them, so it appeared deserted. The houses are arranged so that the entrance to our backyard is on our right, and the entrance to the abandoned house's backyard is next to it. Since the owner took down the fence to install a new one but never finished, there isn't a fence between the two, leaving both open access back gardens. There is additional property behind the abandoned house that is fenced off. Several young males live there, based on what we could observe. Sometimes they would cut across the neighbor's back garden to get to the front of the street when we got home. At first, we didn't give it much thought. Perhaps they obtained permission because they knew the owner. Let's go ahead to our first evening in the new home. Out of curiosity, we glanced up at the houses behind us while we were enjoying the space in the rear garden. At that moment, we saw a man standing at a window, staring at us blankly that he wasn't trying to hide it. He was extremely clear about it. His face was expressionless, and the darkness of the room added to the eerie atmosphere. We thought he was simply interested in his new neighbors. However, we chose to go inside after staring at each other blankly for 30 minutes. The days that followed were typical. While I went to work, my fiancée kept unpacking. We made the decision to sit in the garden once more one evening. Even though it was dark, we enjoyed stargazing and serious chats until we heard someone moving the temporary wooden board fence. We saw 3 males standing there, looking at us. Knowing they wouldn't go unless I spoke, I asked, "Are you okay?" The youngest-looking one, around 29, was holding a big bag, and we had no idea what was inside. He offered us some stolen washing-up tablets, which we declined. I made a joke about it, because the situation felt so awkward. He smiled and said, "Okay." They left after that, and I was amazed at how they entered our garden without saying anything, as like they had every right to be there. We went back inside, assuming it was an isolated incident, but things continued to get. I forgot to mention that my girlfriend and I are both 20 years old, so naturally, the first thing that came to mind was that they might be trying to intimidate us as 2 young women. Things got worse from there. They started helping themselves into our garden more frequently and acting in ways that were obviously meant to intimidate us. One day, while I was cleaning the front room, 2 police officers came around the side of our house and entered the abandoned garden. They lifted up the fence and looked around for a few minutes before leaving without saying anything. It was odd, but I carried on with my day, thinking maybe the people next door were trouble. A few days later, the police knocked on our door and said that the house behind us was now empty, and the men had been expelled for antisocial behavior, apparently not just against us, but also against other neighbors. To be honest, we were relieved because it meant they wouldn't have the opportunity to escalate the situation. We kept settling into the house, but one day, while I was taking a bath, I heard a loud bang outside, so I hastily got dressed and rushed to find my girlfriend. We called the police right away, and they came, watched the video, took a statement, and left us shaken. I discovered her recording something from our spare bedroom window, which faces the garden of the now empty house. She shushed me until she explained that a man we had never seen before pointed up at our bedroom window. And when she saw him, he ran full speed toward our house, tried our door handle on the way past, then ran back into the garden, threw up the broken fence, and began banging on all the windows of the empty house. We were too scared to sleep when we heard whistling a few nights later while we were in bed. It was 2:16 a.m., and we listened quietly until we heard someone tapping on our window. Terrified, we checked the cameras, but for some reason they didn't record anything, so we assumed that whoever it was had left soon after because the noises stopped. Why would they try our door handle and then break into that house? What was he planning? We went to my mom's the next day and spent the night there, but when we came back the next morning, we saw that our Ring doorbell had been taken off and left on the floor. The SD card was missing, and we knew who it was. Who else would do that? We called the police again, and they told us to keep all the windows and doors locked. And the woman on the phone even suggested that the removal of the camera might be an indication that they were planning something, which made us even more frightened, but at least she was truthful. We made several police reports, but but they never tried our door again, so we thought it was over. 3 weeks later, as we were watching funny videos from our camera in bed, we checked the live feed and saw a man outside who was wearing a black mask that covered his mouth and nose and had his hood up. He was standing in front of our garden, his arms spread wide, as if he were imitating Jesus on the cross, and he was staring up at our bedroom window with his head tilted. We froze because we had moved the camera inside the house at the time, so it didn't record. We were so shaken that we didn't even consider screen recording. He then spoke, but we couldn't hear him. He then turned around and walked to the other side of the street, where he stood for about half an hour staring at our house. We called the police again, but they dismissed the whole thing and said it wasn't illegal to stare at someone's property. We told them what he did on our lawn, but they made us feel like we were exaggerating. We were unable to sleep for days because we were afraid of any noise outside, even everyday ones. Finally, at 2:52 a.m., I woke up my partner and said, "There's someone outside," after we received a notification. "I'm aware of that. Check the camera, please." When she did, 2 masked men appeared, shining flashlights into our windows from the side of our house. One of them, the same man who had been harassing us, was holding what appeared to be a crowbar. Why us? What was the point of this? For days on end, he would stand across the street and point, wave, or shout things up at our window every time we looked. Stare blankly at us. It was obviously intended to frighten us, and it worked. We kept calling the police, but they haven't done much. The harassment is still going on. We have cameras now, and we record everything, but we feel helpless. He stood outside earlier today, staring up at us once more. We have it on video, and we're terrified, but we'll let you know if anything else happens. Let me start by stating that I'm not crazy. I know how this is going to sound: paranoid, insane, and delusional, but I swear everything I'm about to tell. I ended my relationship with Caleb 3 months ago. We had been together for almost 2 years, and it was long overdue. Caleb was not violent or anything, but he was controlling and possessive in that subtle and cunning way, possibly the worst kind of way, and would do things like track me when I was on my phone and ask me questions about what I had done that day to see if I would give the same answer twice. After I broke up with him, I changed my number, disabled my social media accounts, and even moved. I thought I was safe until the barista appeared. It was a Tuesday morning, and I had only visited this small, unassuming coffee shop once or twice before. The barista, a girl my age, smiled at me as I approached the counter, but something about her face caused me to pause. She tilted her head and said, "Good morning, sunshine." Caleb gave me that nickname, which wasn't very popular, so I froze. Whenever I was angry, he would cynically respond, "What's wrong? Sunshine?" He enjoyed pushing buttons. I brushed it off. Maybe it was a coincidence. But then it happened again. A few days later, I took a ride share to work. A different driver than usual. Older guy, maybe in his 50s. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror like he was trying to recognize me, and then he asked me if I ever figured out what I was running from. He said as casual as could be. I simply responded, "What?" And he just chuckled and shook his head like I was in on some joke. Caleb said that to me once after I told him I needed time to figure myself out. He leaned in dead serious and asked, "Ever figure out what you're running from?" Now, 2 strangers have repeated things he said word for word. It kept happening. A woman at the grocery store bumped into me and whispered, "You don't get to just go. You're still sporting the hairstyle," a man on the street said, as he passed. Another one, someone who worked in my building, said, "You always similar to this song." The way they looked at me, as if they knew me, or at least believed they did, was what really freaked me out. They all had different faces, but their eyes all had the same expressions, so I thought I was going crazy. I didn't know what else could explain it, so I did something I wasn't proud of. I messaged Caleb, not directly, telling his sister to tell him to stop. I reasoned that perhaps he had hired a private investigator. "I just wanted it to stop," she replied back the following day, adding, "I don't know what you're talking about." Perhaps he was stalking me or pulling strings, telling people stuff about me. Caleb is undergoing treatment. He hasn't had a phone there for 6 weeks. It couldn't be Caleb, at least not directly, and I couldn't get rid of the feeling that these strangers knew things they shouldn't until I saw a picture she shared of him on Facebook a week later, looking pale and sunken in, holding one of those one-day sober chips. However, I stayed late at work one night, because I didn't want to go home because I didn't feel safe in my apartment anymore. Not because anything bad happened there, just that I didn't like being alone. I finally called a night at around 10 p.m. and I walked the 10 minutes to my place, keeping my head down, headphones in, but without music playing, something I learned to do so I could still hear if someone was following me. As I turned the corner onto my block, I noticed a young man sitting on the stoop of the building across from mine. Head down, hoodie up, I nearly ignored him until he asked, "It's cold out tonight, right, sunshine?" When I got to my building, I went upstairs and locked every bolt on the door. I sat on the couch for hours listening to nothing until I fell asleep. When I woke up the following morning, I discovered my doormat flipped over. He didn't look at me. Instead, he just stared at the sidewalk as if he were reading something on it. The bottom of my mat had something written in pen that read, "You can change your face too if you want, but I'll still recognize you." It may seem like a big deal, but I live alone and the door to my unit is on the top floor. You don't just walk by my apartment by accident. I rented a hotel for the weekend. I didn't know what that meant, but I still puked and left my apartment without packing. I didn't feel secure even picking up clothes. I just needed to be somewhere busy. The hotel receptionist assigned me a room on the 4th floor. It felt safe despite being small, quiet, and somewhat stuffy until about 2 in the morning, someone knocked on my door. After 3 slow knocks, I sat up in bed and waited until they knocked again. I peered through the peephole and saw a woman, possibly in her 40s, staring at the door with a completely blank and expressionless face. She didn't say anything, so I didn't make a sound, and she eventually left. It was one of the most unsettling things I had ever seen. When I asked the front desk if anyone had visited my room the following morning, they said that nobody should have been up there, especially at that hour. All of the rooms on my floor were empty, and that's when it hit me. These weren't strangers. They were being shrewd and feeding my information, and they were given phrases that Caleb used. But if it weren't Caleb, who would do it and why? I thought about Caleb in rehab, about his addiction to control and his need to ensure that I was never completely gone. I dug deeper and found one conversation I remembered from months before the breakup. Caleb mentioned a forum he was on, a place where people shared tactics, and he made it sound like it was for productivity or self-improvement. I don't remember the name of the forum. To be honest, I don't think he ever told me, but in hindsight, it sounded like some creepy cultish roleplay crap, except that it's actually happening to me. Someone, most likely Caleb, had hired people to mimic his patterns and say his words so that, even if he were no longer in my life, I would still be reminded of him all the time. I don't think it's about watching me, but rather about making sure I never stopped watching for him. I moved again, disappeared off social media again, even dyed my hair and told friends not to tell anyone where I was. It worked until last week when I was walking home from the bookstore and a woman passed me on the street and said, "Still hiding behind books, sunshine." It wasn't stalking in the traditional sense. It was psychological graffiti, like he was spraying himself onto strangers so I could never be sure who I was looking at. She didn't even pause her stride to gaze at me. Maybe he paid some crazy underground service to do this to me for a year. Who knows? Maybe he made it public. Maybe this is some sick underground game now. Who can get the closest without touching? Who can scare sunshine the best? I can't trust anyone's face anymore. The constant paranoia is really depleting my mental health.